Okay, today's topic is mental health ages 0 to 3. I'm talking with Ashley Lingerfelt, a child and perinatal therapist who specializes in working with kids ages 0 to 6 and new and expecting parents. She's going to share so much good information about how to best support our child's mental health during those pivotal, formative first 3 years. I found her relatable, helpful, and fascinating. I hope you do too.
It's just the best mom ever. You are the best mom ever.
This is the Kid Factory podcast, and I'm your host, Cindy Robinson. The Kid Factory is a not-for-profit aimed at finding cutting-edge tools for healing both our families and ourselves. Come join me as we take a deeper dive into all things parenting and mental health. But before we start this part of our journey, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast, as well as follow the full journey at thekidfactory.org. Okay, now here we go.
0 to 3 is it's such a huge time of cognitive development, brain growth, physical growth, but also emotional growth. And that's really what whenever we think about infant mental health and 0 to 3, we think about how a child's blueprint is being formed for how they attach to the world and how they make sense of their world and how they make meaning of their experiences, both with their caregivers and society at large, right? But usually it starts with our caregivers. And so that's really what we mean. We mean the experience of interaction and all of those things that may affect brain development during that time.
So how do we know what's going to screw them up during that time? So what do they really need from us? Because that's the big fear, right? When I hate some of the research that comes out from like the 1950s, and it was like, if you were a serial killer, it's because your mom didn't hug you enough
No,
when
right.
you were little, or something like that. So how do we know what's true, and if how we're screwing them up at that age, or how not to?
Right. Well, I know there's a lot of pressure on parents, like, we can't do anything wrong. We're going to mess up our children. Well, really, what science says is that we need to nurture our children and we need to be responsive. Those, I think, are probably the two biggest things. Whenever we respond to our children, meaning whenever they signal a cue, right, whether that's crying or they're babbling at us or they reach for us or whatever it might be, there are hundreds of cues they could give, both in facial expression and vocal tone, so many different things. We need to try to provide an attuned response to that. And I don't know if you know what attunement means, but basically having a response that matches that child's need in that moment. Now, it doesn't always have to be perfect, and I can go into this in a little bit, but basically, children just need responsive caregivers who meet their needs as best as they can, both their physical and emotional needs. If you do that and you try, even if you don't get it right every time, you are setting your child up to succeed, and you're not going to screw them up at all if you are at least attempting to provide attuned responses to them. Because what we talk about a lot in infant mental health is this idea of regulation and co-regulation. Really, it's a caregiver's job to help regulate their child's internal systems, both on a physical level and then on an emotional level. Kangaroo care or the golden hour, skin to skin. This is actually an example of co-regulation. We just don't call it that. We call it the golden hour. But really what it's doing is whenever we lay that baby on a child or on their caregiver's chest or in their arms and we have skin to skin, their heart rates actually start to sync up, their breathing calms. This is a physical example of co-regulation. We're helping organize that child's internal systems. And then on an emotional level, we're also, if we are regulated as a parent and we're nice and calm, we help organize our child's emotional state to also be nice and calm. You can probably think about it. I have a toddler myself right now, and I know that if she makes me upset, or if something that she does upsets me, I should say, I might respond in a very dysregulated way out of frustration or whatever it might be. And that further dysregulates her. That's not helping organize her mental or cognitive emotional states. So one of the big things is just trying to be, regulated yourself as a parent and providing that experience for your child. And like I said, you don't have to get it right 100% of the time. You don't even have to get it right half the time.
Thanks for saying that though, because I do feel like when we get this kind of feedback about the infant stage, um, as a parent, you start to panic. Like, well, how am I supposed to be calm if you just told me that if I don't stay calm, my child's going to be screwed up? But I appreciate you saying don't even have to get it right half the time. I think it's really about when you're thinking about the damage that's done from 0 to 3, you're
Mhm.
talking about being neglectful, right? Like depriving needs of your child, not, that you might need to take a break or you might need to let them cry it out one night because you're losing your sanity, right?
Right. I'm not talking. So I'm meaning more so. If we have like prolonged, or how do I put it, repeated moments of the child not having access to a regulated caregiver. Um, Not that we would always label that as neglect, because I mean, as a professional, I've even seen it in homes where the children are provided with everything that they need, and you would certainly say they're not neglected, but there's still sometimes an emotional absence from the parents. The parents are not able to provide that emotional regulation for their child. Certainly in extreme circumstances, like, yeah, that's going to definitely affect the development of a child, if they are severely neglected or abused, right? But
Mhm.
um I don't want us to be dismissive of these other moments. It's important to just try to be as attuned as possible. But if you need to take a break, totally okay. If your child needs to be left alone for a little bit to cry, that's okay. Because a lot of times people view infant mental health and parent mental health, or specifically maternal mental health, as being one or the other. So we
Mhm.
either care, so much about the child and we kind of dismiss the needs of the parent, or we care, so we put the parent's needs first and we kind of put the child's needs on the back burner. But really, I feel like we need to stop polarizing these needs and put them, it's on a spectrum, right? And we can have both needs met. So I hope that makes sense what I'm trying to say. So
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
if a parent needs to take a break, like, yeah, take a break. That's totally fine. You're not going to damage your child. If a parent needs to go in timeout for a minute to calm down and regulate, totally fine. And no, you're not damaging your child at all for that. You're teaching
Yeah.
your child a valuable lesson, right? You're teaching them, like, wow, when something is overwhelming for me, this is how I deal with it. And
Yeah.
that's not via hitting or screaming or whatever. That's, I'm going to go and chill out for a minute.
Right. That is a big worry of new parents, especially, that there's so much pressure about this sort of like blueprint that you're talking about. But I think it is important to highlight that it's a blueprint that's forming, but it's on your sort of overall patterns, not like if you screw up one day. I really appreciate you continuing to say, like, that doesn't mean 100% of the time you have to get it right. And this is a bigger struggle, I think, for parents who struggle with the natural attachment. It's not always kumbaya, the relationship. And so what advice do you have for parents who either don't feel that natural attachment or they're dealing with their own like postpartum depression, that may be conflicting with their ability to bond and attach with their baby and be attuned to their needs?
So there are a lot of factors that affect attachment. Attachment can occur throughout the lifespan. It doesn't, just because you have a rocky start doesn't mean that you'll never have an attachment, that your child will never have a secure attachment with you. It can be repaired. There are lots of moments of disconnect, and then we come back and we connect. Like, some researchers, call it mismatch and repair. And that happens in every relationship, but definitely so in a parent child relationship, right? So, first we have to look at what might be preventing the attachment, or be a barrier to attachment from the parent's point of view. I know sometimes it is something like postpartum depression or anxiety, or trauma that the parent has experienced. Sometimes with intergenerational trauma, like if their parents weren't super, attuned parents, or maybe that parent is now, like, they have their own child, but it's bringing up memories of, like, parts of their childhood where they may have been neglected or experienced abuse or whatever it might be. That can prevent them from wanting to attach to their child. But I would look at that as kind of one piece. But then, on a practical level, there are so many things we can do to just try to, bring joyful, attuned interactions into our relationship with our child. One huge thing when they're infants is infant massage, and you don't have to be like an expert in it, but simply like playing with their toes, being joyful, or being very intentional about how you put lotion on them. You know, narrating things to your baby or to your young child, like, we're going to, peel an orange now. Look at your little hands on that orange. And by doing little things like this, it kind of takes some of the pressure off of parents. Something that I experience with parents is that they're like, I don't know how to interact. Like, what am I supposed to do? Like, get down on the floor? Like, like, what am I supposed to do? And sometimes when we just
Yeah.
narrate our day to our young child, even if they're not verbal and they can't have a conversation with us, back to us, it's not reciprocal, in that way, it can alleviate a lot of the pressure from parents. They can still feel connected to their child just by narrating what they're doing together.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, essentially, it's helping you create attunement, being attuned with your child, just paying attention to little things. And that's a kind of an easy way to, it's so low pressure because you're not having to come up with anything. You're not having to be especially creative. You're literally just narrating whatever you're doing. Like, oh, I'm washing the dishes now. And look at you watching me wash the dishes. What am I doing? Is this a spatula? Like, that is like so much more natural than like sitting down on the floor and forcing play, because that's not natural for a lot of parents.
That's a nice, helpful tip for parents because attachment stuff I think is more and more common because it seems more and more often that parents are having children when they have not spent a lot of time with infants prior to having their own, right? Isn't that a huge shift culturally? I've read something about that recently. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, I don't know what the research would say on that, but I can tell you from my experience that, yeah, I run into a lot of parents. I think our society is just so like, we have to work in order to have money, in order to have a life,
Mhm.
and we are very individualistic. There's not, the saying, it takes a village, but the thing is, like, not many parents actually have those villages, and so children are interacted with in a different way. And I'm not saying that's not anyone's fault. It's just the way that our system, our society is kind of set up right now. And so
Yeah.
the reason I say this is because it links into, yeah, I see a lot of parents who just, they have a hard time knowing how to be genuinely playful, and letting their child, explore just creativity in a playful way, if that makes sense. I see a lot of parents who be, and it's again, it's not their fault. It's just the way that we're programmed as a society. It's like everything has to be goal oriented,
Yeah.
and they have a hard time kind of just like letting things go for a few minutes to play. I don't want parents to feel like it's their fault. I think we just have to. It takes a moment for us to reset and be like, oh, this is a small child that has different needs, and it's very hard to meet those playful needs and those regulation needs. But we have to take a step back and just be for a minute.
Thank you for the
You're welcome.
continuing to be sure that you don't blame or shame parents
No,
because I
never.
think we get enough of that, quite honestly, but also, it's just not accurate, and like you said, we were promised a village, and there's not really a village there, and then in addition to that, yeah, our society is kind of engineered to make parenting nearly impossible these days, like, you know about 0 to 3, but I know about later on, and it doesn't get any easier, let me
Yeah,
tell you. So, it's tough, and there's no way, it's sort of like we've robbed parents of a lot of opportunities to have sort of those natural instincts,
yeah.
and then in addition to that, put so much pressure on them.
Yes, we are driven on, like, you mentioned instincts, and yes, a lot of parents have those natural instincts, but like, the way that our medical system and our society is kind of set up, it kind of encourages them to not follow their instincts. For example, a classic one is like, don't hold your baby too much, you might spoil them. We're still telling parents that, even though that's like just not true. um,
Mm.
Research, it's just not true. That's not founded in research. What we do know is that those first 3 years are critical to neurology and cognitive development and emotional development and resilience later on in life. And the way we foster those things is actually by responding and being nurturing, holding your baby as much as possible, having as much skin to skin as possible. Skin to skin shouldn't just end an hour after birth. I encourage parents to have skin to skin as many opportunities as possible throughout toddlerhood, because you're only building up that emotional resilience and fostering independence one day when that child is ready. But it's very hard for parents to follow their instincts when everything around them, their pediatricians, their OBs, I mean, everyone is kind of
Mhm.
saying, no, we don't need to do that. But they're practicing outdated parenting practices. Nothing that's founded in current research. So I would just want to
Yeah.
put that out there. Like parents, if you're listening to this, please do follow your instincts.
I appreciate that. And that's why I want to talk to you because you really are on more of the cutting edge of what we know about 0 to 3. Because again, at some point in our time, everything that ever happened with every, sociopath or murderer was all about what their mom did to them from 0 to 3. And
We like to
so
blame that.
I'm really glad we're covering this topic in a more realistic way. And you mentioned that about, like, the follow instinct, skin to skin, building this blueprint from 0 to 3. It seems like these years are so pivotal to developing your map of how the world works and how
Mhm.
and kind of is this when, like, the autonomic nervous system is forming and all that kinda stuff, fight or flight responses? Is that when all that's happening?
That's a good question. And you know what? I can't tell you specifically when. Your autonomic nervous system definitely plays a role, and it is developing during this time for sure. All of your systems are just trying to be organized, but it's not like if how do I put it? There's not a window where that shuts off and where you can never, have access to it again or mend it. Whenever I talk about co regulation, that's what I'm talking about though. So, whenever a child experiences stress, their autonomic nervous system kicks in, right? And it starts thinking, like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And so, what we want to do though is try to minimize stress for children, especially 0 to 3. I mean, and this is different than like when I say minimize stress, I don't mean, don't ever let them feel or experience an uncomfortable feeling. That's necessary. When your 2-year-old doesn't, when they lose their toy or when someone shoves them or whatever and they feel disappointed or frustrated, like that's a healthy emotion to experience and that's a healthy stress to experience, right? We want to try to minimize, unnecessary stress, from our environment. Like in that, by that, I do mean like, neglect or unnecessary, like ignoring your child, or I don't know, there are a myriad of things. Hopefully you get what I'm trying to say. But
Yeah.
yeah, by doing that though, and engaging in co-regulation with our child, we are helping organize that autonomic nervous system. We're helping that, and by the autonomic nervous system, we mean like heart rate, breathing. Those are the two big ones. There are all kinds of other factors in there though, but those are usually the two big ones that I talk about with parents because they're kind of measurable, at least on the surface.
Yeah, so it's like
Um,
syncing up with your child,
yes.
like you're literally holding them to your chest or you're comforting them and you're literally showing them how to calm down or how to
Yeah.
regulate themselves. That's interesting. Yeah, I haven't thought about it like that. So why don't we remember those years then? If they're so important, if 0 to 3 is like so vital and it's the blueprint of who we become later on because we see this all the time cuz it makes sense that you don't remember 0 to 3, you're a baby, but at the
Mhm.
same time we see kids who were abused, if they were adopted and they were abused prior to being adopted, and they have struggles later on, and they don't remember the abuse, but
Mhm.
it's still being carried with them. What's happening there? Like, why do we not remember that time, but yet it plays such a huge role in who we are?
Well, I think whenever we talk about memory, I think it's important just to um, kind of break it down a little bit. We have, there are different types of memories. The two big ones are we have explicit memories and implicit memories. Explicit memories are memories that we can consciously remember, like we can consciously recall information. Implicit are the ones that we kind of label as unconscious. And so implicit memories, that's when something can be kind of triggering to us or it can upset us, but we're not exactly, it's kind of like stored in there, but we can't consciously recall it, if that makes sense. So that we need to remember that piece. But then also something important to realize about 0 to 3 is that, well, babies are born with their brains underdeveloped. We're not fully developed human beings whenever we are born, or at birth, I mean. So as our brains develop throughout our infancy, toddlerhood, early childhood, our capacity to remember also develops. So
Mm.
that's the memories that are stored. Um, I don't have. I mean, I'm not reading research right now off the top of my head, but if I'm thinking about this out loud, I would say that they're
Mhm.
implicit memories. That they do affect us down the road. And we can't always remember why, but you hear it time and time again, though, with people, they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't make the connection until just now, but my mom used to do that to me, and I had this reaction the other day, and like I made the connection. You know what I mean? It's like not, it
Mhm.
was like implicit. It's not that they were able to recall it immediately, but it eventually came. And so our bodies, there's a book called our The Body Keeps the Score. I don't know
I
if you've
love
ever
that book.
yeah, Brain, Mind, and Body and the Healing of Trauma by Bessel van der Kolk. And he talks about this exact thing, though. Our bodies, they remember, even if our brains don't consciously remember, our bodies do. But I would just think of it as, it's a lot of implicit memories are being made. And
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I hadn't thought about that because we do that with other things
yeah,
where we don't remember how we learned language or when we when we started, but we speak it.
we speak it.
Yeah, that's exactly the same thing. This is super fascinating. So what bit of advice that maybe you haven't given, or is there anything to cover yet for parents who are having a child 0 to 3 years old and worried about the impact they're making at this age, or what's the best thing they can do for their child? What advice do you have?
To love your child the best way you know how. And you're not always going to be perfect at it. But that's what makes it beautiful. The beautiful thing about children is that they provide us with so many opportunities to get it right. And so, if you have a bad day, that's okay, because tomorrow can be a better day. But on a practical level, I think that it would just be really useful for a lot of parents to, I don't have some basic knowledge of infant development, just so they can alleviate some of these pressures that are placed upon parents in our society. I see a lot of parents who are really worried that, at 18 months, their child isn't speaking 20 words, or, they're not walking by a certain age or whatever. And while I'm not a medical professional, I have to say that. But what I do know is that, milestones occur on a spectrum, development occurs on a spectrum and of normal. And so if your child doesn't fit into the cookie cutter mold and is not sitting up by exactly 6 months, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are a failure as a parent, because I see
Okay.
a lot of parents internalize these very concrete things as a reflection of their like failure as a parent, and that's just not true. The most
Absolutely.
Yeah, the most important thing you can do is just be responsive and nurture your child as best as you know how. And I think that will go a lot farther than anything else.
Do you have a favorite book for parents that kind of covers that well without turning into some sort of, if you don't do this just right, another overwhelming book of to
Yeah.
dos for babies? Do you have one that you think covers it really well?
I will be honest, and I do not, because most of the ones that I know are clinical, and so
Yes.
I use them, but I don't. I share information, and I translate it for lack of a better word to make it more approachable.
I totally relate to that. So you need to write that book
Yeah,
then.
maybe that'll be on my agenda.
If you're interested in working with Ashley individually, reach out to her by going to her website at www.playtimetherapy.org. Yay, you finished the whole episode. For more about the Kid Factory, go to thekidfactory.org or follow us on Instagram at _kid_factory. Cindy also sees parents and teens individually for parent and intuitive healing coaching. All of that information can be found on the website. Again, it's thekidfactory.org.